Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the PLCC Housing Accelerator Action Team's Distressed Properties event, Equitable Housing, Tackling Challenges and Moving Forward. I am Vonette Harris, the PLCC's Housing Development Consultant and today's facilitator. Literally 1 year ago, the PLCC had created the Distressed Properties Working Group in response to media coverage from two large multifamily properties in Prince George's County, Bedford and Victoria Station, and the deteriorating conditions. Members of the HAT were saddened by the horrible conditions residents were living in and were prompted to take action. Recognizing that the challenges that existed at these two properties were not germane to just Bedford and Victoria Station, but likely indicative of what happens when aging properties are in the hands of neglected owners, the PLCC thought it was prudent to assemble a team to create a report that would outline equitable outcomes as it relates to affordable housing preservation along the corridor. With the financial support of the Center for Community Investment, the Distressed Properties Working Group was able to hire a local law firm that provided legal options as related to taking action against slumlords. We were able to research other municipalities and how they manage distressed properties and dealt with uncooperative owners to preserve aging and distressed housing stock that limited the displacement of tenants. We researched the available funding sources at the state, local, and federal level that would help facilitate the redevelopment of aging and distressed properties. The outcome of this working group of housing advocates, elected officials, nonprofits, for-profit developers, and healthcare providers was the release of a 2-year roadmap to preserve aging and distressed multifamily properties along the Purple Line corridor. We specifically looked at properties in Prince George's County. The report that was released in March of this year offered 14 recommendations identifying practical tools that would lead to the redevelopment or repositioning of aging and distressed properties, all while improving the quality of life of the residents that currently live there. The recommendations can be organized in about 4 categories: available funding tools for the intervention in aging and distressed properties, the expansion of Prince George's County's Department of Permitting, Inspection, and Enforcement to protect residents, the utilization and investment of existing county capacity to protect residents, looking at existing laws and powers that are codified in state and county law, and creating a mechanism for collaboration with tenants and landlords. Today's meeting is the furthering of our work with the Distressed Properties Work Group and the 2-year roadmap, collectively bringing together industry experts in housing development, public and private finance, tenant advocacy and support, both from the public and private sector, to encourage a robust, solution-oriented discussion directed towards equitable outcomes and the preservation of affordable housing along the Purple Line corridor. The objectives for today are simple: be present, be engaged, be a provocative thinker. Don't be afraid to think outside the box. Don't be afraid to think beyond your comfort zone. Be realistic, be respectful to a diverse viewpoint, but more importantly, be solution-oriented. It is our hope today that today's meeting will help further guide and direct the work of the PLCC HAT as we strive to reach our goal of a no net loss of 17,000 units of affordable housing to families that earn 60% below the area median income. You know, the delay in the construction of the Purple Line gives us a unique opportunity to figure out the most challenging issues that we face related to investment along the corridor. It gives us an opportunity to address and reverse past racially motivated and discriminatory policy and practices in housing and investment, the effects that are still present today in some of the neighborhoods and communities along the corridor. I close by saying thank you for your commitment today, your commitment of time. Today, you are investing the next 2.5 hours or 150 minutes to learning, growing, sharing, understanding, and building upon your knowledge base and hopefully your passion as it relates to affordable housing development. Throughout today, please share in the chat what you have learned. What are your takeaways from today's session? It will certainly be helpful to the PLCC leadership group as we continue to think of content to share with you in settings like this. So again, thank you. I also want to just give one little caveat. The properties that we referenced, Belford and Victoria Station, through various efforts from members of the PLCC and local officials, we're glad to announce that the previous owner has sold the property and it has now been purchased by Jair Lynch, who will work with the tenants and find an equitable solution to preserving the housing of that important property. So we are certainly grateful that progress is certainly being made in some of our more challenging areas along the corridor. Okay, first on our agenda is some level setting, and which will be led by Laura Seafrost, Senior Program Director for the Mid-Atlantic region for Enterprise Partners. Laura, the platform is yours.
Great, thanks, Bonnet, and good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all here. We have a lot of different perspectives in the room for today's conversation. And so we're going to start today with a warm-up activity that's really intended to mine your collective expertise and uplift the issues you encounter in your work related to distressed properties. Whether you are primarily thinking about how to acquire, finance, and improve them, working with or on behalf of tenants, or creating policies and programs that enable their preservation and ultimately their improvement. So we want to understand kind of as you come into our time today, what issues are top of mind for you, and also start to use that as a way to see where is there commonality across our individual experience with one another. So to do that, we're going to do a quick warm-up activity that is intended to both surface the issues you encounter related to distressed properties from your respective seat, and also help us as a group see where there may be some commonality across these issues, and then carry that commonality into our breakout sessions as we explore two prototypical properties and potential solutions for them. So we'll be using Jamboard for today's activity. If you are kind of in the Zoom room and look to the chat, you'll now see a link to the Jamboard. And when you click on this link, you will see two frames. Actually, I'm going to share my screen just to walk through this real fast. Okay, so when you click on the link, I see many of you are already joining. You'll see two frames. The frames can be navigated using these arrows at the top. The first frame has a Venn diagram, and the second frame has a reflection question. So we're going to start with the Venn diagram, where I'm going to ask that you think about the issues you encounter the most related to distressed properties and add them to the Venn diagram, and then think about if they are more applicable to the property, so the structure, the location, the condition, things like that, or more applicable to the people living in the property, just so we can start to kind of organize our collective experiences. And then we'll take some time to reflect on where we start to see across those issues, some overlap, some things that maybe you didn't think about, some things that might be new, or kind of you see some intersections with your work depending on how you're coming to today's session, and also your work around distressed properties. So to do, just in case, before I turn you loose for the next few minutes to add the issues you encounter most related to distressed properties, in case you are not familiar with Jamboard or haven't used it in a little bit, to add a idea, you can click on this little icon. It looks like a little piece of paper with some lines, and a dialog box will pop up. You can type into that dialog box, and once you hit save, it will add it to the Jamboard, and you can then click and drag and drop to where you would like it. So invite you all for the next few minutes to reflect on your work, the major issues you encounter related to properties and people when you're thinking about distressed properties, and add them to our Jamboard. And then I'll kind of shepherd us through the reflection in a few minutes. So let's take the next four or so minutes to get all your ideas out. Getting a great set of responses, so I thank you for engaging. Gonna say, let's take maybe the next 60 to 90 seconds just to get any other issues that are top of mind out on the Jamboard, and then we'll move into kind of a active reflection on what you've already shared out there. Okay, if you are still adding to the Jamboard, that is awesome. I would say keep going for the next minute or so. If you have already gotten your ideas out, I would ask you just to take the next 2 to 3 minutes till about 10:17 and look at what is already there and reflect on this question. What commonality or areas of overlap do you see across the issues affecting both people and properties? And if you want to add those reflections to the second frame, I welcome that. If you want to offer them in the chat, I also welcome that. So feel free just to reflect on that. And also, apparently, I didn't know this, but Jamboard does have a person limit. So it sounds like someone just, so we're cycling through some people. So if you just got in, please do take a minute to add your thoughts. And if you have added your thoughts, take a few minutes to reflect on what you see there. So if you are still kind of taking stock of what you see on the Venn diagram on the first frame, I invite you to navigate to the second frame or use the chat and reflect on the question, what is one commonality or area of overlap you see across the issues affecting people and properties when it comes to distressed properties? I'm going to reshare the link to Jamboard in the chat just so it's accessible. And ask that you maybe take the next 2 or 3 minutes to think on that question, add your thoughts to the second frame or in the chat. Welcome kind of all avenues of reflection. And then we'll take a few minutes to wrap up with anything people want to amplify for the group before we move it along in terms of our agenda. you've just joined us, welcome to today's event. We are doing an interactive activity, and we're thinking about some of the issues that are both applicable to people and properties when addressing distressed properties. So invite you to engage with that question in the Jamboard link in the chat, or using the chat itself. And we will come back together, and let's give it maybe 1 or 2 more minutes to kind of add your thoughts or reflections to the question, and then we'll come back together to kind of do a final kind of close out this agreement. Okay, invite you to get any final thoughts out in the chat or on the Jamboard, and slowly come back to the full group. As you do that, I just wanted to create the space for anyone who saw something either in terms of a commonality they really wanted to amplify that maybe they added, or something they saw that really stood out to them that they want to bring to the entire group's attention. So I open the floor, invite you to come off mute and share anything that you really saw as kind of a commonality that could help us start to think about, where our common interests lie, where solutions might be able to emerge from, anything that stood out to you. The floor is open. Maybe one last call for anyone who wanted to amplify something they saw or they added, and otherwise we'll plan to wrap this up and move on. So last call for anyone who wants to amplify something they saw.
So yeah, I was struck by these 2 dimensions of working with residents. Residents as critical team players, as assets in this entire process, and then also as the sort of factors that had to be taken into account in the development process, sort of designing around that and taking them fully into account. So.
Thank you, Brian. Others want to add or co-sign what Brian said, or add something that stood out to them?
I think what Brian said was certainly on point. Also, I'm seeing a common theme is dealing with the lack of affordability, and how do we address the lower income tier of residents who are probably most vulnerable for displacement.
Thank you, Bonnet. Yeah, it's such a perennial question and such a tough one, and I'm excited for all of us to tackle that as we go into our breakout sessions, and to hear from some people who have tackled that in our next agenda item. Anything else standing out to people you want to amplify? You see some areas where we can start to build solutions around because we have some common interests.
Well, I won't be shy because it's repeatedly on the board. Financial resources to do this work, from a physical as well as a social perspective. I think it's consistently echoed in what people put on the Jamboard.
Yeah. Another perennial question. So I think based on what's been kind of lifted up in kind of our wrap-up time, so tenants, both as critical players, but also a group to make sure that however you address distressed properties takes them into account, how to really ensure lasting affordability, particularly for lower income households, and then the availability and use of financial resources to tackle these properties. Any other kind of commonalities, overlap, things people want to amplify for the good of the group?
This is Michael, and I'm only amplifying because I want to make sure it gets heard. Thanks to Mary Ann Dillon and others who helped us with the distressed property report. We talked a lot about helping existing owners and not assuming necessarily a transfer is essential for these rehabilitation. We need to have transfers, obviously, in some cases, but we know from other preservation strategies across the nation that sometimes the best strategy is to figure out a way to work with an existing responsible owner to help rehabilitate the property and keep the people in place. Not that that should be the only strategy, but it's one that we sometimes overlook.
That's a great point, Michael. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, especially as we kind of go into our strategy time. So I will think that will be our last word for this portion of today's session. So I want to thank you all for just the really robust Venn diagram and reflections that you brought into today's conversation, and excited to explore them further as we move through today's time. I will turn things back to Vonette to kick off our next agenda item.
Thank you, Laura, for leading that. Bridget Nichols once said, sometimes in life, your situation will keep repeating itself until you learn your lesson. Next, we're going to have an engaging panel discussion with some industry practitioners. We have 3 real estate development firms who have acquired properties along the corridor, and we have one tenant advocacy organization that has been at the forefront of elevating tenant voices and concerns as relates to equitable housing. Our panelists will be sharing their experiences, their lessons learned in doing redevelopment and working with tenants along the corridor. Our panel consists of James J.T. Engelhardt, Director of Real Estate for National Housing Trust, Po Tran, Director of Investment for Jair Lynch Real Estate Partners, Ashante Martinez, Research and Policy Analyst for CASA, and Robert Goldman, President of Montgomery Housing Partners. And our moderator will be none other than Maria Day Marshall, Colvin Institute of Real Estate Development at the University of Maryland. So welcome everyone to the platform. Before we dive into the questions, which I'm sure everyone is eager to get to, I have asked each of the panelists to prepare a 2-minute presentation about their projects that they've invested in along the corridor, as well as asking CASA to certainly share about the work that they're doing. So they're going to do that first in the order of, that I presented, starting with JT, Po, Ashanti, and Rob, and then Maria will take over the platform and start firing the questions away.
This is JT Engelhardt with NHT Communities. Am I going to be introduced, or do I go now?
You've been introduced. Okay. You can go right now.
Oh, sorry. I wasn't multitasking. I was going through what I was going to say. Hello, everybody. I see a lot of familiar faces and even more familiar names from NHT Communities, and from I see our mezzanine lender on Hamilton Manor on here. And anyway, and I do want to note that I've been tracking through colleagues. I've been tracking the 2 properties that Jair Lynch just purchased, and that's wonderful. That's really a positive outcome to a situation that we didn't know how it would work out. So I can't wait to hear what Fo has to say. Okay, so Hamilton Manor, that is in Hyattsville. It's 245 units, built in the 40s. It's a garden style property, really well located on Queens Chapel Road. It's walkable to PG Plaza Metro and also to the West Hyattsville Metro. A developer, an owner, a property owner based out of New York, New Jersey, listed it for sale in 2020. It got under contract in early 2021, and PG County decided to exercise the right of first refusal, and they issued an RFP to the list of pre-approved developers that was done so we could move quickly. And boy, did this happen quickly. we proposed to the county a JV with the Washington Housing Conservancy, and it was based upon a financing plan that was used this new product in the DC market by JBG Smith called the Washington Housing Impact Pool. It's a mezzanine loan that gets a little bit lower rate due to tax exempt. Its ability to privately purchase tax exempt financing from the county. And that funding stack, along with a pilot of $1,000 a unit, it was a bit of a reduction from what property had been paying, and $1 million in housing investment trust funds, enabled us to stretch to meet the strike price, or the price that we had to match. In addition, our proposal included 20 years of affordability for 3/4 of the 245 units, and 40% of the units are at 60% AMI and 35% are at 80% AMI. This was a naturally affordable property, but given its location, given the trends, it was not going to stay naturally affordable long. So this is a great project in that we were able to use that ROFR to intervene and get the property to a good partner for the county. WHC is relatively new. NHG Communities has been around for a while, and let's see, we started. We were picked, I think, in April. We had to close. I think it's a 6-month period from when the ROFR is issued by the county until purchase, and we purchased it right before the deadline in August. Let's see, the funding stack was 39.5 million. Oh, no, the funding stack was the majority of the funding stack was a Fannie Mae loan, and we were able to get them to underwrite the pilot, which had not been acted upon it by the Prince George's County Council. So that was great of Fannie and Berkadia, our lender. And then we got a mezzanine loan from the Washington Housing Impact Pool run by JBG, and WHC and NHG Communities included some equity in addition to the $1 million in support from the county housing investment trust funds, and all of that we were able to cover transaction costs and match that stretch purchase price. The last thing I'll say, and I'm open for questions, I think, whenever we go to this discussion period, the last thing I'll say is that the purchaser of this property, July Residential, they actually bought something a little bit just around the corner, a little bit closer to the West Hyattsville Metro, called North Point Apartment Homes. That's 234 units, and it's similar vintage, similar era, garden style. So I continue to be curious how these properties over time change in terms of physical quality, in terms of rents, and in terms of the community. So that will that's something that I'm excited to see, because I believe in this transaction, and I'm excited to have led it for NHG Communities. All right, that's all. Thanks.
Thank you, JC. Poe?
Yeah, hi everyone. Bo Tran with J.R. Lynch Real Estate Partners. Fun fact, JT and I worked together about 19 years ago, back when I first moved down to DC in 2003. So that's good to see an old face. And you did not have the beard back then, as far as I recall.
Couldn't grow it.
So I work with J.R. Lynch Real Estate Partners. We're a real estate development firm based in DC. Been around since 1998. Strong focus on sort of mission-oriented projects, as well as market rate kind of Class A projects. We've over the years done a lot of what we call neighborhood assets, things like schools and libraries, rec centers, medical office buildings for groups like Community of Hope and Mary Center. Over the years, we've owned up to 4,000 units of what we call attainable housing, but really is a combination of affordable housing with restrictions like LIHTC, as well as the NOAA property that we're talking about today. So villas at Langley, off of University Boulevard and 15th Avenue, originally owned by an out-of-state landlord based in New Jersey. Like the property JT mentioned, it was naturally occurring affordable housing, continues to be naturally occurring affordable housing. It caters to Spanish-speaking population. Very unlike some of the newer construction today, a lot of 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms. So a lot of families, lots of kids. Average rents are about $15.51. Most of the units are below 60% AMI, with a smattering that are a little bit higher. We bought the property with a social impact investor, a group called Nuveen, and assumed the Fannie Mae loan, which had an outrageous interest rate, and still has an outrageous interest rate. But that was what it was. That's what it was, and we couldn't get beyond it because of the prepayment penalty. But Naveen is a long-term investor, and we hope to hold the property for 10 plus years. And there is redevelopment opportunities throughout the property in order to create additional affordable housing over time. We did not. This was before Prince George's County was active with its ROFR program. So there's no at this time subsidy or pilot on the property, but we are working with the county to on those items to try to add some some actual restrictions on the property to guarantee its affordability.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Ashanti, you're on next.
Good morning, everyone. Ashanti Martinez, Research and Policy Analyst at CASA. I did send in a slide, Bonnet. Did you guys receive it? Or if not, I can pull it up.
It's coming up now.
But before I talk about some of the work that we were doing throughout the pandemic in Langley Park, I just want to give a quick brief overview of CASA, who we are, and why we do this work. CASA is an immigrant advocacy organization mainly focused on working class immigrant communities in Virginia, Georgia, Pennsylvania, as well as Maryland. We just extended our reach to Georgia, and we're really, really excited to begin doing work there. Our mission is to create a more just society by building power and improving the quality of life in working class communities. For us, our advocacy is driven by our members. I like to always say they're in the driver's seat of their own liberation. And they're the ones who give us a lot of our strength, but also the direction in which we choose to go in. Over the pandemic, a lot of our members were frontline heroes, but unfortunately, because of their immigration status, were intentionally excluded from a lot of federal assistance and aids when their neighbors and down the street were receiving stimulus checks. These folks did not. And a lot of their opportunities to make money were cut short, whether that be through construction jobs or other types of work. There just weren't as many opportunities because of COVID. And so a lot of these individuals were really struggling to make choices, right? Do I pay for internet so that my child can continue to go to school virtually? Or do I scramble money together and pay the rent? Do I provide food and be able to pay for laundry? Or do I scramble everything I have together and pay the rent? And for a lot of the individuals, many of whom had lived in Bedford Victoria Station in particular for a very, very long time, being forced to stay at home made the lack of humanity and the conditions a lot more apparent. It's really easy to kind of pacify conditions when you get to leave the majority of the day and only have to sleep where you live. But when you're forced to stay at home, a lot of, whether it be the rodents or the bugs or the holes in the walls or the deteriorating pipes and just lack of AC or heat, a lot of those conditions start becoming overbearing when it is all you can do and all you have to be in for a long period of time. And a lot of the tenants started having conversations about how can we collectively come together to demand better, since we all are in very similar circumstances. Bedford Victoria Station in particular is a very large property. It's over 550 units. and majority of the people that live there are working class immigrants, many of whom are CASA members. And so we at CASA assisted them in their organizing. They were on rent strike for several months, and collectively were able to work with the county to alleviate a lot of the back rent that they owed through the emergency rental assistance program. And so we're really extremely grateful for the work that Aspasia and her team at DHCD have done to ensure that a lot of our tenants were made whole throughout this process. For us at CASA, the conditions and the treatment from management and the negligence that they had were why we also worked with them on a lawsuit that they're still currently pursuing. And we're really encouraged by the new ownership and look forward to working with Jaya Lynch on this property as we have with Villas at Langley. But I look forward to the questions as well. But for us, this was about an issue of dignity. This was about an issue of humanity. And we're really encouraged that conditions we think will get better for our members in the future.
Thank you, Ashanti. Rob, you are on deck. Rob, you're muted.
Do I need to share screen, or do you have my slides?
We have your presentation. It should be loading momentarily.
Okay, while you do that. Yeah, Rob Goldman, president of Montgomery Housing Partnership. We are a private nonprofit that develops affordable housing, been around since 1989, so a little over 30 years. And, we look at it in terms of housing people, empowering families, and strengthening neighborhoods. And so our work is not just about acquiring properties and developing properties, but it's also providing array of programming for our residents, from preschool and after school programs to computer classes, health promotion activities. Been very active during the pandemic to help our residents kind of get through everything. And then also thinking about the neighborhoods around where affordable housing is located. We've been very active in the Long Branch community for years, and obviously very active and very involved around the Purple Line. We own, actually have developed, I think, over 500 units throughout the sort of near and around the Purple Line, which, it's, a combination of relatively small properties to, sort of medium-sized properties. Do you have the slides?
Actually, if you already have them pulled them up, Rob, you have the ability to share your screen. I'm sorry, we're just having a hard time hunting them down between our tabs.
Yep. 1 second. Okay. It says you disabled screen sharing.
Oh, one moment. I have found them, and just give me 1 second. I'll pull them.
Great. So, MHP, as I said, been very active in the Purple Line corridor. We're, obviously always looking. We had, for years, we have, there was a property we were very interested in near the Forest Glen Metro. It was owned by a landlord who'd been in the business for a number of years. In the course of working on that property, and she was very difficult to work with. I think, a lot of people tried to get that property. A lot of real estate agents approached us and said, we'll get you that property, and none of them could. They didn't have the patience. We somehow had the patience and the perseverance to work with her and get through it. And in the course of doing that, we acquired, she was retiring, eventually retired, and sold her remaining portfolio. So we bought the last 3 properties in the Montgomery County side of the portfolio. which included a property near Forest Glen, and then two Metro, and then two properties along the Purple Line. One of them was called Hillbrook Towers on 515 Thayer Avenue, which we just finished renovating. We just had our ribbon cutting on Friday. There was a tornado watch and eventually tornado warning during our ceremony, which may be symptomatic of the condition that these properties were in when we got them. And so if we had a small tornado warning after this, the first one, we should have a serious weather conditions when we do finish Hillwood Manor. This property was in the worst of all conditions. When we talk about distressed properties, this one really was the most distressed. The owner basically ran into the ground. We acquired this in 2016. It's located on New Hampshire Avenue. It's actually a very nice property. On the front side, you've got New Hampshire Avenue, which is obviously somewhat of a busy street, but in the back you've got sort of a lot of woods and creek and just a wonderful area for residents to kind of get away from the hustle and bustle. And so we're about 3/4 of a mile from the Langley Tacoma Purple Line station stop. This is it's a 96 unit property. We like to do sort of a mix of even within the affordable range, we like to do a mix of incomes. And so we have 13 units at the lowest, less than 30%, 23 at 50%, and 60 of the units at 60%. And one of the things we were able to do, many of the units were kind of smaller, 1-bedroom and units. We were able to kind of, in 8 cases, due to the location of where it was, we were able to sort of expand out some units, bump them out essentially, and create 8 3-bedroom and 4-bedroom units, which I think the city of Tacoma Park and many others thought was a real positive thing, given family sizes and other things in that area. And you see here in this slide, we are, we have sort of an opportunity. We're creating both an outdoor kind of area for the residents, as well as creating some community space. Again, our focus is about community programming, and so we are creating kind of a small community center of sorts so we can do some programming with the residents.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate that. We want to turn the table over to our question session. So we're going to turn the platform over to Miss Maria Day Marshall, and she's going to be asking you guys some very great questions that's going to help frame our work moving forward. So Maria, you have the platform.
Well, thanks, Vanette. I just want to thank all of our panelists for their presentations. They were very informative, and I would like to thank you for sharing your experience with redevelopment along the corridor. So I'm just going to dive right in because I know that we're short on time. And I'll ask the first question to all of our panelists. And that is, what attracted your organization to invest or work in the Purple Line corridor? So why don't we start with you?
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, it's transit-oriented development. Our site is 0.5 miles from 2 Purple Line stations. It was also an opportunity to get in early on preservation. We've seen numerous examples in the area where transit comes and housing prices start to skyrocket. And you've seen some of that, but it's not quite at the level, whether it's Columbia Heights or U Street, whatever it may be. So we wanted to get in early with a preservation strategy. And as an example, we bought Bedford recently, and it's 15% higher today than what we paid for villas. So, you know, the inflation on housing is just incredible. And so we knew we had to get in early. And, you know, there's opportunities at villas. It's villas as well as Bedford allows us to control 50 acres of land in that immediate area. And it allows us to, you know, to really master plan it over time, to think about, you know, how do we bring in new LIHTC housing? How do we bring in new middle income housing? And how do we bring in maybe some public facilities, whether it be a library or a new Boys and Girls Club? So there's a lot of, you know, so we're developers at heart. We own and operate a lot of units now as well, but we're developers at heart. So that was a great opportunity for us to do preserve housing as well as reimagining that area.
Thanks, Val. JT, how about you all?
Well, personally, I've lived in the DC area for 24 years, and I've watched the trends over time, and realize the injustice of it for those that don't get in early in whatever situation, be it home ownership or property acquisitions. And this is the third one I've done with NHC Communities, where we've grabbed a property in an existing property in a gentrifying area, and basically, in a sense, saved it. One was Topa, right at the Congress Heights Metro in DC. It was an existing property, and so the tenants chose us, and that allowed us to intervene in a transaction and replace a buyer that had really not necessarily evil, but, you know, much more market-based aspirations than we did. That was the case in Hamilton Manor, and I did one in a nice suburb of West Hartford as well. And they all have different risk situations because you have to move quickly. In the case of this ROFR, we did it in partnership with the county. So the risk was reduced compared to some of the other ones where we had to just grab it when we could and then compete later. And maybe not be successful and just hope. So that was really good, the way PG County has set this up. But in general, despite these high acquisition prices, and they keep getting higher and higher and higher, it is cheaper, more cost efficient, and it's a cheap way to do affordable housing. When you grab something that is affordable and is going to not be affordable if you just look down the road, it's a way better use of state and local subsidy resources than it is to do new construction. I'm not criticizing new construction, but this is something that we really should do more of in the DC area systemically. And I really like how this one worked out.
Thanks, JT. Rob, how about you really quickly?
Yeah, we've been long time, we're about neighborhood revitalization and neighborhood work. And this has been a neighborhood that we've been working in, and we've been beating the drum from the beginning, along with CASA and University of Maryland and eventually the PLCC, that we got to do something. I mean, these acquisitions are actually late in the game. I mean, we're not early, we're late. We've been trying to get folks to put the resources toward this years and years ago. Maybe we're benefiting from the delay in the purple line, but this is something, when you think about the prices when we were first starting this, and the missed opportunities and the various properties in Langley Park and other places, and Long Branch that have changed hands at prices that have been much lower. So, but this is vitally important, and this is something we've been very concerned about.
Ashanti, what are some of the primary concerns tenants have with redevelopment in their developments?
Yeah, I think the number one concern is that folks will be priced out, and that a lot of the revitalization of the areas will ultimately fast track some level of gentrification. For us at CASA, we know Langley Park in particular, where our headquarters is located, has so many individuals that just can't afford to move anywhere else. And where they live, they've created almost their own ecosystem of businesses and just support systems from various different countries that they come from, that they don't really want to go anywhere else either. And so our involvement is trying to make sure that a lot of their worries don't become realities, and helping them organize themselves and really build power, I think, is how we continue to drive the conversation that we must do everything we can to keep prices low, to keep things affordable, so that these folks can continue to thrive in the communities that they currently reside in.
Mm-hmm. I know that these projects are really difficult to do, getting the financing and relocating tenants. What are some of the biggest challenges you find in redeveloping properties along the corridor? JT, can you pitch in on that one?
I mean, I can speak in a general sense, because the specifics of Hamilton Manor, it was a straight acquisition, and it was a stretch to do it. The financing stack is all based upon that. So the improvements over time are really relatively modest when you talk about a redevelopment. But in general, redeveloping is really tough for properties that are occupied. It's drastic, and we've done a couple of these tax credit renovations, and you can, go in with best intentions, go in with a really good and transparent relationship with the residents, and it's still brutal, but it's still necessary, because at the end, you've got a property that is good, modernized, energy efficient, and good for 15, 20, 25 years. And that in and of itself is that will be good for many tenants, not just the tenants that had to suffer through it's just difficult to do a renovation. Usually you're moving tenants from you try to minimize the amount of tenant moves, so you try to go from old to new, but sometimes tenants want to go old to old back to their original, and so that's costly and difficult and traumatic.
So Fo, do you agree with JT that relocation of tenants is your biggest challenge?
Yeah, it will be like JT. Ours was an acquisition, so we have some time before we undergo any redevelopment at the property. So I think a lot of what we're trying to do right now is to build that trust with residents, and CASA has been and work with CASA. So it's we've done about $14 million of renovations at the property, from everything from redoing the balconies to the windows to just fixing housing violations that were at the property when we took over it. And it'll be a collaborative process over time. As we master plan the site, it just has to be a collaborative process, because our goal would be to not displace anyone, but to actually increase the affordable housing that's available at the property, and bring in our stakeholders from GHCD and the rest of the county to make sure that we have the subsidies in place to do that. But yeah, it's top of mind as we think about how we bring more housing to our properties, and keeping the residents front and center in that discussion is going to be very critical.
Well, you guys talked a lot about how the local government supported your efforts. How do you think they could be more supportive in future redevelopment projects? Rob, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, two things. One, to add to the previous question, and it relates to this question, one of the biggest challenges with distressed properties is getting to do all the renovation that the property needs to do, and then raising the capital and the gap financing and others to kind of get there. And that's where government plays a big role. Otherwise, you're doing this sort of value engineering, you're cutting back on all that could be done. And this is sort of the opportunity when you're doing a major renovation to do that. So the government can, we're very fortunate in Montgomery County. They're very supportive, and they've given resources. The state was very supportive and found ways to find additional resources to make it happen. One thing that we've been advocating for, and I think needs to get resolved one way or another, that one of the best tools that Montgomery County has is the first right of refusal to buy properties. Right now, the county, it used to be the county kind of did it, and then they kind of got a nonprofit to really buy the property, and they kind of, at the closing table, we kind of gave them the money and they closed. They now don't believe that they can do that. They feel that the county has to put all the money out on the table. And they don't, for larger properties, they don't have that large amounts of money in the hip to do that. And so it's become a stumbling block from the full use of the first right of refusal. And so it's something we feel needs to get resolved. We've been conversations with the county executive, and he's supportive of what we're trying to achieve. It's just trying to get there. So I think that's a big tool. I think second, what more the county can do, these projects all involve a fair amount of pre-development work. On a preservation deal, we're probably outlaying close to $2 million on a deal, and to get to final closing on a new construction, we might be putting out $4 million. That's a lot of money, right? And you faint of heart. And I think the local government and the state government could think about ways to provide pre-development funding to make sure that these deals get to the final closing.
Thanks, Rob. So unfortunately, I think we've run out of time, but I have one last question, and it's directed towards you, Ashanti, and that is, how can local governments support the tenants through the redevelopment process?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that I think both Montgomery County and Prince George's should definitely look at is creating or dedicating funding to do tenant relocation. Providing that assistance to the developers, I think, will be critical. But also we need to just ensure that we're building that trust. I think over time, individuals understand that in order for things to get better, they will have to leave. But it's just having the trust that they know they can come back and be able to, live their lives in a much more suitable unit moving forward. I think that is still needing to be built. But yeah, any funds that we can dedicate to help people be relocated for the long term of the redevelopment is really key.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Vanette.
Thank you so much, JP, Poe, Ashanti, Rob, and Maria, for shepherding and sharing your experiences about doing investment and doing work along the corridor. I think it really has certainly framed and shaped our thought process as we lead to our breakout sessions, which is next on our agenda. I hope everyone had an opportunity to read the property scenarios. We have already randomly placed everyone in a breakout group where you will be able to discuss the fact patterns. For expediency, we've already assigned facilitators and note takers for each group, so you don't have to do that. We really want you to kind of just dive in and share and really think about what are the best approach and strategies for repositioning these hypothetical properties and how we can best protect the residents. Certainly keep top of mind some of the principles that were uplifted in our opening session. We were brainstorming and kind of leveling the playing field. What are some of the challenges? You guys will have about 30 minutes to really dive in and unpack the challenges and come up with some solutions. And then we will reconvene, and the note takers that have been pre-assigned will certainly report back out to the group. So at this moment, Katie, if you can go ahead and put everybody in their groups, will be great. Okay, I think now you guys can hear me. I'm speaking and I'm like, okay, no one's responding. I'm sure everyone had a great conversation in your workout groups. We were really diving into some policy issues and unfortunately didn't have enough time, but I wanna, let's start talking, hearing back from what everyone discovered in their session. So let's start with Laura's group. And I think the note taker in that group was Sarah.
It's
So
me.
Sarah, if you could kind of, oh, it's okay.
Yes. Hello. My dog also might start barking in
Hello.
one moment. Just heads up. Sorry, everybody. Just like leapt up and jumped on the window, and I'm like, all right, it's about to come. So anyway, hi everybody. Excited to report out from group one. Had a lot of great discussion about the first scenario. Do you want me to recap the scenario? Or do we feel like everybody's good on that? And I can just talk about the discussion just as far as
I think we're
process?
good on the scenario.
good.
Just talk
Fabulous.
about the discussion.
Okay, great. So this group one focused a lot on how the potential buyer could really engage residents in determining the preservation approach. So really understanding resident realities. It sounded like, in the scenario, a lot of challenges with the property, and understanding what they really wanted to see and what their vision was, recognizing that it's likely that a rehab of this property was going to be pretty significant and very disruptive to residents. And so that it would be really important to engage them early to understand their vision and to really get their buy-in and kind of alignment, given the fact that it's likely that relocation might be needed, and again, a significant disruption in lives. In addition, another component that we spoke of with regards to resident engagement is the fact that there are language barriers noted. There are a significant number of residents that don't have legal status. And so it would be important to also partner with an organization such as CASA, who is part of our group, to work with residents and also to help potentially create stronger relationships between residents and local government, who might be able to bring in resources such as rental assistance dollars, as those rental arrears that were mentioned were significant and could also be have adverse impact on a potential sale. So it's also highlighted that those delinquencies would need to be addressed in some way before a sale could go through, given the significance of those. In addition, the property right now, we noted, is actually a bit denser than the new zoning will allow. So there was potential to go in for upzoning as the property was going to be redeveloped so as to not lose units in this opportunity, right? They exist. And in addition, there was actually discussion around thinking through kind of a mixed use opportunity. So could there be some commercial or community uses actually brought into the site, and rethinking, obviously these are existing buildings, but if they're scattered, is there opportunity to bring in some new uses as we're potentially going in for that upzoning on the site? And then lastly, this property is part of is cross collateralized. I'm gonna I don't know where our finance person is. I can't see him on the window, but if I butcher this, please jump in. So meaning that this property is part of a larger note that is tied to other deals and other debt. And so it's going to be really important to really fully understand those realities and make sure that we are talking to all the different players. There are going to be multiple potential owners part of this deal, and important to talk with the Fannie lender as well to get sign off on any payoff terms and make sure that that works on this deal. So just adding increased complexity. And again, if I butchered that, please weigh in.
Sarah, no, you did fine. Myron,
there you are, Myron.
Yeah, the finance person in the conversation. No, you did fine. I mean, that scenario, if I could just pick up for a quick second, like, it's part of a $2.5 billion portfolio, which is like nuts. As a $15 million, note standalone. So it's like, okay, who all is involved in this? What terms are they looking? I mean, it's a Fannie deal, so theoretically it's not going to be some crazy thing, but important to understand who's involved in what and make sure everybody's cool with any kind of transaction taking place, because everything stops if that doesn't happen. So
thank you, Myron. Yeah, and so that was our group. So thanks, group one, for the great discussion, and Laura for the facilitation. I hope I captured everything well.
Thank you. That's great. Appreciate that. Our second group was Nick's group, and I think Chris was the note taker. So Chris, the floor is yours.
Yes, thanks, Bonnet. Just very briefly, our group was talking about a property not unlike Bedford and Victoria Station. It's a very large property, over 500 units, and it was zoned for medium density before. It was rezoned, but maybe the rezoning wasn't quite as much as what the developer might like, and it had it was in poor condition. Also, overcrowding was very common in the units. So to the first question about what the best approach is to redevelop or reposition the property, there was some back and forth about whether it might be a LIHTC deal. Initially, we thought maybe it might be, but we also thought this, because of the size of this, it might not be possible. And ideally, though, we thought that any redevelopment or repositioning the property really needs to start with a good tenant organizing effort, one that would hopefully motivate the seller to sell. But we thought that a real challenge is going to be gaining the trust of tenants because of the poor condition that the property is already in, that trust has already been eroded, and that even if you have a buyer who wants to do right by the residents and the property, that you really need to be able to communicate that effectively, and how things will be better going forward. And then this kind of led to the next question about, is it possible to redevelop or reposition the property and maintain current levels of affordability? We thought it would just, because of the size of the property, it's just not possible without a subsidy. But we did think that a property of this size will be a priority for both local and state government, so it had that going for it. But we also thought it was important that there be a mission-driven developer involved in this that is well capitalized, because with an acquisition like this, the public sector, they just can't do it on their own. So they need a developer that's well capitalized and sees himself as part of the solution. We had a great conversation about what the redevelopment of the property might look like, how it's structured. We thought maybe initially there could be like an initial phase of redevelopment, and then possibly you could try and do like a twin 9%, 4% deal to create some new units of the property. We did think, because it's over 500 units, any redevelopment is going to have to be phased in. But we thought that the new units could also help create some greater mix of affordability at the property that doesn't exist currently. So there were a lot of great ideas floated around about how to structure the redevelopment. And about addressing the issue of unauthorized individuals living in the units. Obviously, the goal should be no displacement, but that may be difficult. And yeah, this kind of gets back to the point of tenant organizing and why it's so important, because you really need to get in there at a very early stage to understand the residency, the circumstances of individual households in order to develop a good rehab plan. And then to questions 7 and 8, we felt like these were very interconnected about how you effectively engage the resident population during the renovation process, and what resources might be necessary to assist both the buyer and residents during the process. We felt that bringing in local nonprofits could really help to assist tenants with social services, to address issues like overcrowding or food insecurity, vouchers, daycare, transitional housing, because it might just be too much for the developer themselves to address. And then we kind of talked about, this was the case with Jair Lynch and CASA, how that really worked to both the advantage of those organizations and the residents, because they had the language capacity and the trust of residents. And then the last thing I'll just mention is that we talked about it might be beneficial if we develop case studies that look at past redevelopment efforts and how it could improve or inform future redevelopment efforts in the Purple Line corridor.
Thank you. That's great. Hearing some very common themes that I'll summarize after our group, and Alex was our note taker. So Alex, the platform is yours.
Hi, everyone. So building off of Chris, we also went in a similar order. We broke things down a bit by regulatory issues and solutions, financial. Our first question, rehab or redevelopment. Our group pretty much was in consensus that it makes most sense to rehab the building rather than build new. There would be more of a chance to preserve the existing density and hopefully less disruption to the tenants. We had a developer in the group said, there's a rule of thumb that for redevelopment, you're aiming to at least double the number of units. So if we can't even get back all of the units that existed, it makes more sense to rehab. But on the other hand, we also said there may be a chance to request an exception to the zoning or a zoning change. And maybe we're not even targeting to preserve the existing density, but to request more since it's located near transit, it will be affordable housing in the long term. And maybe losing density isn't all bad if we're actually able to accommodate the actual size of the families who are living in the units. So we were kind of looking at that from many different angles. We also said that rezoning can be an expensive process, and so that would be the time we would need indication from local government and jurisdiction that moving forward with this made sense before we put in the time and the money. We also talked about how to support the tenants and property management and ownership in engaging with each other and communicating appropriately and effectively. And we said, as many have, that the owner and the property management are the first issues. I think we brought a lot of questions about whether anyone had spoken to the owner, if we had gotten both sides of the story. We're also assuming that the owner and property management are focused on making money and less focused on tenants' rights and issues. And but our first step would be to engage the owner and property management company, and as a couple of you have mentioned, bring in a group to support the tenants and communicating well and making sure that they receive communications at least in their first language. And we also said that going through notes here. We also mentioned the cross collateralization, and that is probably a key tool to bringing the owner to the table. And that at the end of the day, maybe it's something similar to what Montgomery County did, and it's asking the local jurisdiction to, force out owners. Someone said either, owners are being told fix up the property or sell it to someone who will, manage your property well. I would say that was pretty much using cross collateralization to bring the owner to the table and considering selling the property to a responsible, misaligned owner or developer. That's please jump in if I missed anything from our group.
No, thank you, Alex. I think you kind of captured, we started to struggle on how to address the overcrowding issue, and we didn't quite get enough time to fully dive into it, other than, is there a possibility of increasing the zoning or changing the size of the unit to accommodate the family size? But how do you do that without totally disrupting the residents? And then we kind of lost time. But thank you. This big things that I'm hearing is that this is going to require public-private partnership to really pull off, because of the need for resources, need for effective community engagement, as well as potentially looking at this as a phased redevelopment approach because of the size of the property, that you can't do it all in one chunk, was kind of the things that I'm hearing consistently throughout the panel, different sessions. Now we're going to move to pattern 2. We're going to go with LaToya's group, and Moha was the designated note taker. So Moha, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Bonnet. And so just for those who weren't a part of the next 3 groups, property B was a much smaller 12-unit property, and the actual land has some development possibilities. And so I think that ties in directly with what our group sort of first started talking about, thinking about the rents that are currently deeply affordable, given the limited incomes the tenants have, and sort of maintaining that, sort of increasing the density could potentially be one way to help to do that, but obviously wanting to better understand what those additional density possibilities could be. I think given the small size, the 12 units this current property was, I think what our group sort of agreed on was that this would be a great housing credit deal, but probably wouldn't be really attractive to an institutional buyer. So probably wouldn't be able to go about as a housing credit deal, given the physical needs the property has. And so probably would rely pretty heavily on the county for support, whether it's the physical needs, or potentially even sort of technical assistance for residents to help sort of partner with a nonprofit to figure out how those dollars would work. So I think that's sort of really tied into a couple of the other questions that were asked that we were considering around how to, like what resources the county could provide and what the tenants might need. And so I think a strong one was sort of missing that technical assistance and support for tenants, especially if they were to choose to own the property themselves. So both the county and the tenants had various levels of a right of first refusal or a tenant opportunity to buy. And so we're talking about how to ensure that it isn't a reactive process, but more a proactive process of talking to the tenants and sort of figuring out if they wanted to be developers and owners, and whether that would sort of be feasible, or whether, you know, you would look to having a smaller nonprofit be that developer and owner, but in partnership with the tenants, and sort of have the tenants sort of assign their rights to make that happen and preserve that property. And of course, thinking about what resources the local government could provide, whether it's lawyers or consultants or direct funding. I think one thing that our group also discussed was, you know, given the size of the property, it's fully occupied. It would probably need to relocate the tenants because there was some major plumbing, mechanical, and electrical needs, just really hard to do with tenants in place versus just some sort of external rehab that would be possible to do with tenants in place, which I think brought up a follow-up question around, like, what are the opportunities and how do we support a potential tenant relocation? And really thinking about supporting the tenants in what they actually need, rather than just deciding, you know, as a developer, if you're going to go through this process, what to do. So I think a couple of our group gave examples of you know, tenants temporarily being put into hotels, but the hotels were so far away from their lives if they had children, you know, the schools, and often sort of bore the cost themselves and actually moved back closer to their original property while it was undergoing rehab and lived with family or friends. But maybe you wanted to use that money in a different way. So could I get a storage unit, or could I pay for rent in a house nearby? So thinking about, you know, what is actually possible and sort of being able to give tenants that choice if they can't live at that property, what would best suit them and their lifestyle and where they're at right now. I think the last sort of bit of our conversation was really thinking about home ownership and if that is something that tenants wanted to go through, if they wanted to exercise their right and be owners of that property, what that structure might look like, what their needs might be. And there was actually an interesting idea that came out of our discussion, sort of a two-part strategy, thinking about, you know, at the time of purchase, really focusing on the needs of the common areas of the property and really rehabbing them, you know, and the exteriors of the property. And then, you know, sort of a secondary phase of including as part of the down payment assistance, as part of the mortgage process, any of the interior work for individual units, like once a tenant is actually able to purchase the property, and sort of provide them with supports in terms of, you know, the feasibility of someone actually being able to get a mortgage, what they actually need in terms of technical assistance, homeowner readiness, and I think then longer term thinking about how to maintain that ownership and not just thinking about the purchase price, but property taxes and other ongoing needs that a unit might need. So that's kind of a rough summary of our discussion on property B. So Vonette, I'll pass it back to you.
Wow, that was great. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna go to David's group, and Jesse, you're up to give us
Yes.
just a summary of what you guys discussed.
We also had property B, the 12-unit property. First, we talked about what local government can do and really discuss the financing challenges because the property is so small and likely can't access traditional developer sources. And so we talked about the importance of local government to provide funding for the acquisition and rehab, and talked about the challenges with these distressed properties, how the per unit cost can be really expensive. So also the possibility of potentially pulling in vouchers to subsidize rents, but definitely the need for subsidy and other loan programs to finance the repairs. And we also talked about existing local financing resources and technical resources to help tenants acquire and purchase the building, and potentially convert into some sort of ownership like limited equity co-op. We talked about how in some cases Montgomery County and other local counties have provided 100% of the financing for ACC rehab, although this isn't likely, and that funding is limited. And so we talked about available resources like HIF inside the Beltline Fund, Federal Home Loan Bank, and also tapping into local national CDFIs. Also, given the capacity and technical limitations of tenants purchasing and preserving a building for the first time, we talked about partnering with organizations like CASA and CASA and NANO that do have expertise working with tenants to preserve these smaller buildings and converting that into limited equity co-op model. Similar to what Moha kind of covered, can renovations be achieved with residents in place? We kind of concluded likely not, because the building's fully occupied. There aren't really vacant units. You can kind of shift residents around, and there will likely be relocation costs. In terms of how we could protect the long-term affordability, we didn't have one final conclusion for this question, but we are thinking of potentially getting subsidy from local government that could have long-term affordability requirements or some sort of covenant. And in terms of the best approach for completing acquisition and substantial rehab when these tenants are interested in long-term or in home ownership, we discussed something that I thought was interesting was with the amount of debt, the 1.5 million and 2.3 rehab costs, tenants with there need to be substantial subsidy in order for tenants to have control and also have some sort of form of equity. Because I think likely scenario might be that there might be property control, but limited equity for tenants, given the high cost of renovation.
Thank you. You guys are doing a great job. Thank you. The last group was Michael's group, and I believe Sheila was the note taker.
Sure, yeah. So we were also focused on this 12-unit building. And with a building this small, I think the focus of our conversation and the starting point really was about engaging with the tenants to set expectations, to understand where people were at, and explore the different avenues for the future. So starting with an income survey to really understand what the residents, what options the residents have in terms of home purchase. Are they bankable? Would they be able to get an individual mortgage, which could be the first approach. If that seemed not feasible, there's also the option to look at a co-op structure, limited equity co-op, which might involve a different kind of financing that might be a little bit more available to the group. And the third option would be looking at having a mission-oriented developer come in and buy the building, and really thinking about how you can convert it to a rental building to maintain affordability, maybe or maybe not using LIHTC, but really thinking creatively about that. Given the lower incomes of the tenants in the building, there was some discussion about the creative financing that would be needed to make the math work. And Michael, I'll ask you to fill in the details if I miss anything here, if I butcher this. This is not my area, but looking at potentially seeing if a mission-oriented lender might come in and subsidize over the long term, considering whether there's a hybrid owner-renter model, which could be tricky operationally, but it could work. And I guess it has worked in other places in DC and elsewhere. Thinking about the subsidy that you might need, and looking at the current rents that they're probably barely covering operating expenses. You might need to increase rents or look at it a mix that might bring in additional income, which there was talk of vouchers similar to a previous group. If you could, even if they're not available now, think about whether you could do a voucher deal, because it's going to be some years before this happens anyway, that you could wait on that. Then again, more creative financing options around looking at a first position loan and a soft second, which could expand the possibilities. And Michael, feel free to jump in and add dimension to that piece if I missed anything.
I think you did a great job. I would just say that we talk equally, I would say, between the two-step idea of purchasing now and figuring out a way to get vouchers downstream, because it's going to take a while. And then Will talked about a limited equity co-op possibility, which I thought another group did, but you did a great job, Sheila. Thank you.
Thank you all. I think there's some very common themes across both fact patterns. I think you guys saw that you had two different fact patterns, and believe it or not, these are challenges that the PLCC are facing or seeing along the corridor. Very large properties with huge needs as far as renovations, and very small properties that have the same similar huge needs, large acquisition prices, and how do we maintain the level of affordability? That is the challenge that we are faced with. So thank you for all of you for taking the time to just think critically and to think critically, and was able to share your thoughts and articulate them with the group. It was certainly impactful. I think what is clear as far as common themes is that it's going to take a public-private partnership. There's a need for additional subsidy, flexible capital, soft second. I applaud Michael's group for bringing that up. Relocation and how to address that. Is there a relocation fund that can be established by local government to help these larger properties and even some of these smaller properties in an effort to maintain affordability and offer opportunities for existing residents to be able to live along the corridor. And it's going to take intentional community engagement. And so there's different ways in which we can achieve that, but you have to be intentional and be effective at it. So thank you so much for diving into these very, very complex fact patterns. So we're headed to the home stretch. Next up, we're going to talk about resources, because that seems to be one of the things that was consistently echoing. What resources are available to help further the mission of preserving affordability and renovating these properties? And so we have speakers from the state and both county governments, as well as from the PLCC, of our resources that could be helpful in our mission. We have, looking for my notes, I'm sorry, guys. We have, for this portion, to discuss the different resources, we have representing the PLC, Alex Carbrough, the Director of Lending for the National Housing Trust. We have from the state, Brian O'Toole, Chief of Housing Production for Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. From Prince George's County, who's going to discuss the right of first refusal process, as well as county resources. Aspicia Expolio, the Director of Housing, Department of Housing and Community Development. And from Montgomery County, who will also discuss their resources and the right of first refusal process, we have Frank Demaray, Deputy Director for the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. We're going to start with Alex, who's going to talk about the capital lending pool and resources that the PLCC offers. So Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vonette. Hi, everybody. My name is Alex Cabral. I am the Director of Lending at National Housing Trust, and I'm here to talk to you a bit about one of the financing options for affordable housing in the Purple Line corridor. Oh, you good? There we go. And just a background on NHT, National Housing Trust. We're a nonprofit focused on affordable housing. We're based in Washington, D.C., but we have operations across the U.S. We are an affordable housing hub that focuses on various aspects of affordable housing. We have a policy team, a real estate development team. We own and manage 40 affordable housing properties across the U.S. We have a sustainability and renewable energy team, and we also have a lending team that houses 2 community development financial institutions, National Housing Trust Community Development Fund and the Institute for Community Economics. And we make loans to both local, regional, national, nonprofit, and for-profit affordable housing developers and owners. Our general lending background in the DC metro and even I would say mid-Atlantic area, we're a full suite affordable housing lender. We lend to these developers, owners listed here under the WHO, including often developers and owners that find it more challenging to get access to financing, like community land trusts and limited equity housing cooperatives. And we offer, these are a suite of loan products under the WET, pre-development financing, acquisition, bridge or interim development loans, many perm loans, so not often more than 5 years or so. And nationally, we also offer all of these products to all of these developers and owners, but oftentimes are focusing on the projects that would not get to the next stage or across the finish line, if not for our financing. So a bit of a difference there. And we also, one of our CDFIs manages a pool of lending capital to support affordable housing preservation and development within 1 mile of future Purple Line stations. This is our work with the PLCC, and I'd like to thank our investment partners, JP Morgan Chase, Kaiser Permanente, and Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And here's a bit about the loan terms. So the project, as I said, will be a housing development or a housing preservation project within 1 mile of future Purple Line stations. And if we're sharing these resources afterwards, I also have a link. If you have a project, you can look up the address and determine whether it is within that 1 mile radius. So I can share that out. Property types are new construction, preservation, can be multifamily, single family, rental, home ownership. The borrower is a nonprofit or for-profit affordable housing developer or a limited partnership. And it can be used anywhere from pre-development through construction and bridge financing. And upon exception, some energy efficiency financing is available as well. And these are the loan terms. Up to 2 million. At these terms, we will consider going above 2 million. The terms may change just a little bit. Up to 5 years, and if the loan funds are used for an equity purpose to meet an equity need in the project, then we could consider going over 5 years. The interest rate will be 3 to 4% with a 1.5% origination fee. And we'll often look for a senior subordinate position on the property, but the loan can be made unsecured for full recourse to the developer. And here's a couple example projects. I included the ones we've done just far, but I'll just touch on a few to be short. We made an $800,000 loan, pre-development loan to preserve 96 units in a multifamily rental building called Hillwood Manor. We also made a $125,000 pre-development loan. This was for new construction for 290 mixed-use development in Riverdale, Maryland, that's known as Heaton Springs. And then we can just flip through the rest. There's these have great pictures though. So one in Tacoma, another in Tacoma, I think there's a couple more, 102 units in Silver Spring, and the loan process. So if you're interested in accessing this capital, you can contact me through email or phone, or Ms. Bonnet Harris. Providing a description of the project, really the more that you can offer upfront, the better. We're happy to talk through anything at earlier stages, but appreciate all of the diligence and information you can provide thus far. If it's deemed a fit, we'll likely call you back and have a couple more conversations to get more of the details. If all signs still point to go, then NHT will send proposed loan terms. And once those terms are agreed upon, we'll send you a loan application and an invoice for the application fee. Once those are returned back to us, we can go through our underwriting and loan approval process. And once the loan is approved, it'll be documented and closed with funding available. And I would say typically the process, depending on your time, or the developer, owner, the entity seeking funding, the timing of their team, of our team, and any deadlines that need to be met, typically takes anywhere from 1 to 2 months from initial conversations and providing initial diligence to the funding is in your hands. And here's my contact information, as well as my colleague and the head of our lending team, Josh Earn. So thank you all for your time, and I hope to hear from you.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate that. Now we're going to have Brian O'Toole with Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. Brian, the floor is yours. Did we lose Brian? Okay, let's go to Aspasia.
No, I mean, I didn't.
Okay.
So anyway, when I was looking over the attendance for this, I was impressed by the span of people from, some of the most able and developers in the country, and consultants, to people who are mid-career and people who are newer. So I'm going to do a quick, I'm going to start at about 30,000 feet and dive pretty quickly into, some of the more specific details. So CDA is the housing finance agency for the state of Maryland. So we issue tax-exempt bonds. We allocate long-term housing tax credits, and we have a fair amount of subordinate debt allocated to us from the state, and also channels through us from the federal government. So our mission is to produce 3,000 to 4,000 or so units of quality, affordable housing every year that expands and preserves affordable housing opportunity, that greens the multifamily portfolio, that revitalizes communities, that creates quality housing for persons with disabilities they can afford, and creates employment and entrepreneurial opportunities for Maryland workers and businesses. So that's the big picture. And then, I'm going to talk a little bit about how a project, gets funded by us, or how we participate in it. And then thirdly, what we've got right now for preservation. So I'm focusing on preservation rather than new construction. And then a little bit of just quickly, who's who, how you get in touch with us. So those are the bulleted, kind of mission dimensions that I just mentioned. And so basically, there are really 3 doors in the CDA. One is the annual 9% LIHTC long-term housing tax credit award, very competitive, once a year. The scoring is oriented to new construction rather than preservation. There's the 4% LIHTC door. This is rolling. This is where almost all of our preservation work is done. These combine taxes and bonds with long-term housing tax credits, and typically with subordinate debt of some, and often are done in close partnership with our local jurisdictional partners, Montgomery County and Prince George's County here. And then we're trying to grow out our shelter and transitional door, not LIHTC, but for homelessness prevention and so on and so forth. So focusing now on the 4% LIHTC door, as we all know, the storied author of affordable housing, Leo Tolstoy, once observed that every happy project is happy in the same way, and every unhappy project is unhappy in its own unique way. And so the 5 things that a good, happy project entails is a quality development team, thoughtful, thorough, site-appropriate due diligence, so you really understand the property, the right design and construction budget, that you're responding to the property's needs, and then for us, that it passes our threshold review and minimum scoring, and that there's strong local jurisdictional support. And happily, in Prince George's County and in Montgomery County, you can really take that not for granted in a casual way, but just you can appreciate it because it is there. And both counties have been terrific partners, kind of spurring this development. Our general, because we have to produce this housing across the state, and we are a first ready to proceed sort of operation. You come in as your project is ready to go. It's on a trolley track. And if you're ready to get to a closing in 9 to 12 months, that's when you'll get there. And if you're if you're not, then you're going to take longer. So so to get started with us, a pre-application meeting is really a great and wonderful thing to do. It kind of focuses us, it orients us, it gives us a chance to think about how we want to work with the project. It gives you a chance to get the latest and greatest information on what funding's available, what timelines can look like, and it allows us to, we don't like to think creatively too often, but to the degree that we ever do any creative thinking, this is kind of where it can happen. So there's a link on our website. You can go there, and I'm going to kind of bullet out a sort of a tentative agenda and a list of submittals, but you don't need to have this. You can do several pre-application meetings, and you can come in at a very conceptual level and then come back when you have a little more detail. So this is just a little bit of our scoring, which tells you kind of the stuff that we think is important to look at. And as you'll see on a 200-point scale, about 35% of it is focused on the development team. That's really essential. The community context where we're doing this is important, whether it's TOD or not, which is, the purple line obviously is a quintessential TOD set of projects. The public purpose really focused mostly on the character of the residents, leveraging how effectively we're using public resources, and then the quality of the product that we're generating. And then, so for the 4% side, obviously, in order to qualify for 4% LIHTC credits, you need at least 50% of the project to be financed by tax-exempt bonds or a tax-exempt loan. We currently offer really 6 executions. They span Freddie, Fannie, and FHA, and then we also do a risk share approach. So there's one of the things to talk about in the pre-application meeting is kind of what is going to suit you best. There's a lot of factors that go into picking the right execution, and so it very much is a project by project, and also kind of where we are in the cycle, kind of a set of questions. So anyway, but this is I think I put the link on, this is on our website. You can kind of go every Friday. We update the indicative rates for each of the executions. Typically, when you're modeling up your project, you'll want to put about 100 basis points of cushion on your first lien debt assumption, and so forth. So just by way, before we delve into specific pots of subordinate debt, I'll just generally note that we have about 100 projects in the pipeline right now. And we're, as everyone who has been working in this field through the pandemic knows, this has been a bumpy ride. And some of the key financing parameters have just gone crazy. Construction costs have spiraled through the roof. Interest rates have really spiked in the last 6 months, particularly. Credit pricing for LIHTC has been soft. So a lot of projects which began life with a certain set of underwriting parameters assumed ended up stalling out because their construction budgets went kablooey and their capacity to handle them shrank as interest rates rose and their first lien debt lift decreased as well. So we weren't totally oblivious to these factors, and neither was the Secretary or the Governor, and so nor the legislature. And so this year, typically we get about $60 million rough and ready in subordinate debt. That got bumped to about 200 million this year for the year going forward. The two things to say about that is much of this funding is sort of earmarked now for particular projects, but we are very hopeful that this represents a sort of a new normal, maybe not 200 million, but we've had increasing support from the legislature over time. One of the reasons for that is our local jurisdictional partners have grown capacity. So our pipeline, has grown and really has stayed robust. People recognize these are very important projects for building the future of their communities. And so,
Brian,
yes, am I going on too long?
if I can get you, if you could just go to your subordinate debt, because we have 2 more speakers before our ending time.
So rental housing works is up to, we can go up to 3.5 million for projects that are 50 units or more. And the partnership rental housing funds are up to about 12 million. Those are usually about 6. We have 2 doors for those. The ones where we have local jurisdictional participation and rents are capped for those units at 50% of the statewide median. And then we have for individuals with developmental special needs at 30% of AMI, we have some partnership can be used for that. We have a Weinberg for extremely low income households, about 200 million a unit for persons with disabilities. That really, this is an SSDI income. We get an energy audit for all the rehabs we do, and we try to blend in some energy money. Usually we encourage people to think about 3,000 a unit there for the energy conservation measures that they're going to put in. We're launching an emerging developers fund this summer, probably about $500,000 per award for newer community aligned developers in strategic communities. And then we have home money about 11 million and NHT about 11 million. So and so that's where you request the form. I'll skip through this is stuff we'll try to talk about in the pre-app meeting. And then the most important name on this roster is Ed Barnett. Ed runs the rental lending group. So the construction admins, the underwriters, et cetera, are working on his team. And so he's the person that you want to really be talking to on particular projects. So that's it for me.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. Next, we're going to have Aspasia Polio. She is the Director of Housing for the Department of Housing and Community Development in Prince George's County.
Great, thank you, Vonette. And so we will only focus on preservation, the county's tools, and the county resources as it relates to preservation. And before we go down that road, I want to explain the two kinds of preservation. There are committed affordable housing homes in the county, as they are everywhere else in the state and in the nation. And they have affordability covenants, and those covenants have expiration dates. So that means that something that is today affordable committed, it doesn't necessarily mean it will be in 5 or 10 years from today. So I want to put that on its own separate category. And then in Prince George's County and in other places in the DMV, we have what we call naturally occurring affordable housing, which is housing that has no restrictions. It's market rate housing that has lower rents, and those rents are affordable to people making 50% or 60% of area median income, right? But that is a disappearing asset. There is nothing that can guarantee today that those rents will stay put the next 5-10 years. And I want to do these two separate tranches of discussion because there are somewhat different strategies in dealing with both. And we take this second category, the naturally occurring affordable housing, very seriously. We take the first category very seriously too, but that's a national discussion. Everybody is worrying about committed affordable housing today that has expiring covenants. So that is happening. As it relates to the naturally occurring affordable housing, we think that there is a moment in time in the county to really be focused on that, because that will not be with us forever. It is possible that in 5 to 7 years today, if we don't act upon it, we will have very little naturally occurring affordable housing. And that means that if we have this net loss of what today residents can afford, we're going to have to build twice as much to catch up. So we see rents trending in the county faster than our neighboring jurisdictions. The data from 2014 to 2019 are based on census, but based on recent appraisals, we've been able to see, based on deals that come our way, we see actually that some submarkets in the county are trending most recently even higher than that. So we know that the pressure is there. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk just for a split second about the committed affordable housing. Our team took a rigorous effort to map it. So at least we know where there is currently committed affordable housing in the county, and we are looking to see when their covenants are expired. Brian talked a lot about the tools the state has. A lot of times when covenants expire in this committed affordable housing, the developer will recapitalize, go for another 4%. So naturally, some of that will continue being committed. It is not guaranteed, but naturally we see that happening. It is possible though that they're going to try to not do that. And to the extent that the property is not going to trade hands at that point, we have very little, if none, if any way of intervening. But if the property is going to trade hands at that time and the developer, the existing owner has decided not to recapitalize and not to stay with the affordability in the long run, we do have a right of first refusal program that also applies here as well. So you can go to our website and take a bird's eye view. And I want to clarify that we didn't map out housing authority units. It is really the privately owned, affordable, committed properties in this inventory. And next slide, please. So a little bit about our right of first refusal program. So it has been in the county's code since 2013. And we did not start exercising this until December of 2020 or January 2021. And that is because it is a great idea, that it is hard to implement. So you really need to have a very clear and strategic implementation strategy and resources. So, I'm going to talk more about, so we relaunched the program in December of 2020. And pretty much what does the program say is that if there is a transaction happening in the county for multifamily rental properties of over 20 units, we get notified and DHD gets notified. And we look at the property, we look at the rent roll, we see where the rents currently are, and we look at the location so we can assess rental pressures. And we do that very quickly because there is a very short window to say if we're going to exercise our right or not. And so based on a scoring scenario, we have the right to put it out in the roster of developers and ask them if any of them wants to purchase them for the exact same price that the PNS says, in exchange for establishing long-term affordability in the property through covenants. And so we started exercising this right and issuing RFPs in January of 2021. And we have been able to successfully go through this process with two properties in the county, the Hamilton Manor that you heard earlier and the Camden at Larco that closed very recently. I will say here that we're very excited about that, but also what we were learning earlier in the process is that we were issuing RFPs and no one was saying, oh, I can do this, which also, I'm going to speak a little more about it on the next slide, which made us fully aware that the market alone cannot do that. Like, it's a great program, it is in our code, it does now have a clear implementation strategy, but it wasn't enough, and it isn't enough on its own to take off unless we're able to step in with resources. And then there is another way that we can accomplish the same. It is if you are a buyer and you are purchasing this property in the county, you can come our way first and say, I would like an exception to the county's right of first refusal process. And in exchange, I will establish affordability covenants in the property. And again, how much of affordability covenants we are asking them to establish and at what levels has to do with the exact same criteria we look in the previous option. Where are the rent rolls right now? Where are the rents right now? Where is the property located? So we have seen sometimes, the rents are like at 60% AMI, and someone says, oh, I will restrict them at 80. Well, it's like $800 of a difference. So we are always very careful and thoughtful about how things look on paper versus what really matters. And with a lot of mission-driven developers were able to have this very honest and clear discussions and establish a win-win strategy. So we do have two properties now that have undergone through this second option, the Dogwood and the Bedford and Victoria that you heard earlier. And next slide, please. So since January of 2021, we have been able to preserve long-term affordability in 759 units in the county, and 625 of those units are in the purple line area. And we do have a lot of active deals that our team is working on. And so we are projecting that by year end, by calendar year end, we will have preserved 1,200 units in the county. So as I said earlier, we learned really quickly that we need resources. And so we are incredibly thankful that the county set aside $15 million from our ARP allocation towards helping us create the acquisition funding. And I want to give major kudos and thanks to the state of Maryland who is stepping in and giving us another $10 million to supplement the county's $15 million investment. And I saw on the call John Maneval, our esteemed consultant, who has talked to everybody pretty much who is interested on the investment side or the development side in doing work in the county. So we can understand how should we structure this fund, right? Because not all money give you the same outcome. So we're trying to structure this in a way that is flexible, it can be deployed quickly, it is in a form of subordinate debt, and also creates the accountability that we needed to create in the long run in terms of the interest of the county, which is to be the stewards of the long-term affordability governance. We also expanded the roster of developers. We had a great list of 15 pre-qualified developers. We issued an offer, now our list is 29, I think. And so that's important, so we can have greater capacity of mission-driven, well-capitalized developers in these efforts. There was also a push and an accomplishment from the county's part to amend the state legislation, so we can actually offer pilots to right of first refusal properties. Because the way the code was written, it was a little convoluted and you had to provide also financing in order to put a pilot. So there was an amendment made that makes this now possible and easier than before. And when we, DHED, are offering a combination of gap funding and pilot in a project, we're always looking at the long-term accomplishments. And our eye is always geared towards what am I trying to accomplish? Long-term affordability of the rents, but also understanding what are the maintenance and capital improvement needs that can be funded with a combination of upfront infusion of capital and also with the tax abatement we are offering. So there can be a better cash flow to implement those improvements during the affordability period. So its deal is unique, and we still think we have ways to go, and we want to make this as strong as possible of a program, but that's what we can offer that has happened the last 14 to 16 months. And these are our contacts. You know me, Pam Wilson, she's our veteran. Everybody in this call should know Pam, and Adam as well, our senior underwriter. And everybody interested in the right of first refusal program should also talk to John Manuel, our consultant. Thank you.
Thank you, Astacia. Appreciate that. Next, we'll have Frank Demarais, the Deputy Director from Department of Housing and Community Affairs for Montgomery County. Frank?
Yes, and Vanette, is it possible for me to share my screen?
Katie, if you could
yes, it is.
give Frank. Okay.
Okay, it's not up
And
yet.
Frank,
but
before you started, we're a little over time, so I want to be considerate of folks. So if we want to wrap up in the next 10 minutes, so if you could do your presentation in 8 minutes, will be greatly appreciated.
it will be 8 minutes or less. Okay.
Ooh.
All right. As soon as I can get my screen to get to. At this point, I will work with the slides there to save time. Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. A number of the things that I'll touch on were talked about in a variety of the breakouts, as well as some of the other presentations. Montgomery County has a fundamental focus on reducing the housing cost burdens of our residents. And we're focused on creating as many restricted units, income restricted, and that will be in preservation projects, new production projects. And we see all of that as protecting the current residents, their ability to stay where they're choosing to live and remain in their communities. In the county, broadly, the planning department identified 28,500 NOAA units in their 2020 preservation study. And with the metrics and the detailed analysis, indicated up to 11,000 of those at risk of loss of affordability by 2030. Across all of our efforts, we focus on leveraging our money together with other investments, but our tools that come into capital lending, into acquisition and preservation, or imposing of the restricted covenants on the properties include acquisition financing, and we've had Alex speak to the Affordable Housing Opportunity Fund approach. I'll touch on that. Our Housing Initiative Fund. This is a broad set of funding from the county, general funds, capital improvement project, borrowed funds, and we provide those funds for long-term gap financing to preserve affordability. I'll touch on our right of first refusal. The county has the opportunity on every multifamily property of 4 units or greater. We also have a by right, new this year, by right pilot of real estate tax abatement for long-term dedicated affordability, together with negotiated pilot for other eligible properties. And we also dedicate a fairly substantial amount every year to rental support, separate from the COVID rent relief, separate from the HOC and some of the other federally funded rent support. We have a dedicated revenue stream from recordation tax revenue that goes to rental agreements. I'll touch on how we use those in preservation. To highlight how this works in the county, just looking at FY22, coming up on the end of FY22, at the end of June, we have committed to 16 projects, 1,214 affordable units, 627 of those for preservation. So about half of that commitments for preservation. Overall, about 69 million of county loan financing, which is inclusive of our home and CDBG funds. But per unit, we've been able to achieve long-term support, where a portion of the total funding support for at about 56,000 per unit. This year we had 11 different partners, including for-profit, nonprofit, and part of our overall spending includes 694 units that we've preserved through rental agreements, which are shorter term. FY23, the council has just approved in the last 2 weeks the county executive's proposed budget. We had a total 140 million across all of our affordable housing, but 100 million of that dedicated to long-term lending, focused on long-term covenants, regulatory agreements. Within that 100 million, we've actually segregated and we created a separate capital improvement project called the NOAA Fund. That 40 million is dedicated, and we will, only lend that money on properties that have at least half the units at or below 70 AMI currently, and we'll focus on partnering to get those properties under control, establish long-term regulatory agreements for as many units as deeper than the 70% maximum LTV or AMI. The other 60 million is available for use in acquisitions, preservation, or production. So the county doesn't have only 40 million for preservation. We have at least 40 million for preservation. At the per unit expense we've been able to achieve the last 2 fiscal years, we're hoping that this 100 million can help us support up to 2,000 units coming under regulatory agreements. Everything on our HIF guidelines and HIF lending priorities is the same. We separate the monies by preservation for that 40 million. We're focused on across the county. We do prioritize at-risk properties. The transit corridors, particularly the purple line, represent very specific at-risk factors. The planning's preservation study highlighted this and actually quantified a lot of it. So we're very much focused, and we are engaged in a number of properties along the corridor, the purple line corridor, but we have a number of other areas in the county, which we have a significant under pressure affordable housing naturally occurring. So Alex spoke to the Affordable Housing Opportunity Fund. This is separate and distinct from the 100 million I just spoke to. Last year, we budgeted 14 million out of our FY20 and 21 budgets and put FY21 and 22 budgets, I'm sorry, and established an RFP process. And we selected and have an agreement and a structure effective the end of March with National Housing Trust Community Development Fund. This new budget includes an increase of 6 million so that we now have 20 million of county funds dedicated to this opportunity fund. This is an acquisition preservation fund. It will provide 3-year lending for acquisition. The county's funds will be dedicated through this fund management by NHT, and they will be coordinating additional leveraging funds. And we expect that this will support at least $80 million of acquisition activity. At the time the properties come in, we're focused on the takeout or long-term affordability opportunity. The county fully expects that in many of those, we will be working with the developer on long-term financing out of our HIF. And the focus here is to get these funds repaid back into the opportunity fund and revolved. And we're hoping that we will see a steady revolving of this over that 2-3 year period. So we will be hopefully in the market supporting our partners. The terms that Alex spoke to, NHT's website, you can see are going to be focused on, up to 105% loan to value, and focused on interest rates and structure that we hope will be very competitive and will be very timely with dedicated ready access funds. The right of first refusal, spoken to a little bit earlier today. The county's review of every single multifamily property Last year was $3.5 billion in sales in the county on 12,000 units, 284,000 per unit. That was a doubling, more than doubling since 2020, and where we had about 1.4 billion and 6,200 units. But it's that cost per unit that's a significant focus. The market valuation of rental properties indicates that these properties being purchased at these multiples based on expected increases in cash flow and rents. So we're very focused on the preservation challenges. We have to purchase a property under ROFR with county cash. We cannot finance them. It does limit the size of the properties that we can get engaged with. When we purchase, we immediately turn those units around and same day sell them. We pre-arrange affordable housing partner to take the property. We'll work with them in financing of that, and we'll work with then positioning for long-term financing. In the last 2 years, we've acquired and resold 68 units. And we've also engaged the buyers and sellers in every property we look at where we will not be purchasing. We work to preserve and extend existing affordability. And we will use pilot agreements and we'll use rental agreements where we agreed to pay a portion of the rent for a determined period of time. The pilot in the county updated this past year is now an automatic by right pilot if a property implements a new regulatory agreement where at least half the units are 60% AMI regulated for at least 15 years. And it has to be done by a nonprofit controlled or operated entity. So previously the county's pilot was only per unit that was regulated units. And we were providing pilots on just about all of our affordable housing developments, but it was per unit, and the dollar amount per unit was about $1,487 in the last year. That's actually a state real estate tax on single family house credit number. It's an unusual number, but it's about $1,400 to $1,500 per unit. The new structure is 100% of the county real estate tax on the property if you meet those thresholds. And we retain the opportunity to continue negotiating. As Brian just did, we can talk about a number of these things in various forums, but the key is to get in contact with us, to work with us. Our head of our multifamily division is Lawrence Cager. His email's on the screen. I'll make this available through the team here to get out to the participants. Myself, we have a lot of information that's available for your tenants. One item I had on there earlier that's critical to our preservation is our code enforcement. Montgomery County has a relatively rigorous code enforcement architecture. We did a sweep, a surge in 2018, and we do it annually. We go out to every property that had significant findings based on complaints or inspections. And at a certain threshold, the property is considered troubled. If it's a troubled property, it is inspected 100% of the units annually. Then we have at-risk properties that are less frequently, generally every 2 years for a portion. And then we have the compliant properties, which is every 3 years, again, on a percentage basis. But we are extremely focused on preserving the habitability and the operating of our properties through the code enforcement. And rest of information at our website, there's a whole section on our multifamily lending programs. And then our annual report, and I didn't go through which properties we've been working with, especially in the Purple Line corridor, but we have a 2020-2021 annual report that highlights quite a number of the properties, a number of which were mentioned earlier with the Hillbrook and Hillwood properties significantly distressed in partnership with the Montgomery Housing Partnership, and the state went through a long process to maintain and preserve those. And I'll leave off there.
Thank you, Frank. I appreciate it. Thank you, Brian, Alex, and Aspasia for sharing this information. It's greatly appreciated. I want to thank all of our participants and certainly those who helped with the planning, the small group of planning, the PLC to pull off this event. I think it's been certainly an informative, engaging, and robust event. I think we all can see that there's much work to do in preserving affordable housing, but what is clear is that we certainly have a large a group of individuals that are mission-minded and are eager to roll up their sleeves to really further the goal of housing preservation. So thank you for allowing us to take an extra 20 minutes of your time today. It certainly is appreciated, and we will certainly be in touch and share the information from this event with all the participants and registrants. Thank you, and certainly enjoy the rest of your Friday.
Many thanks, Vanette.
Thank you very much for everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Take care, everyone.